So I'm Paulo Sousa. I'm a cognitive anthropologist. I did my studies of anthropology in Brazil. I had an MA and a master in Brazil. Then, because I was interested in this area of cognitive science, I went to France, had another master in cognitive science in Paris. Dennis Perber was my supervisor. Then I went to the United States and did my PhD in Michigan. Again, in anthropology, but in the area of cognition and culture. In Michigan, they have a culture and cognition program there. So then, after finishing my PhD, Harvey Whitehouse, who was founding the Institute of Cognition and Culture in Belfast, invited me to go to Belfast to be an international fellow. Then, during the first year I was there in Belfast as an international fellow, they opened a position, and I got the position. So I've been in Belfast in the Institute of Cognition and Culture for 6 years now, and I'm currently the director of the Institute. So the Institute of Cognition and Culture is, of course, the area of cognition culture, which is a field in which scholars try to explain the stability of cultural phenomena by utilizing the methodological tools and the theoretical tools of the cognitive and evolutionary science. So in our Institute of Cognition and Culture, we have a master's degree in cognition and culture and a PhD in cognition and culture. The MA in cognition and culture takes a year for the student to complete the MA. PhD normally in the UK is 3 years, 3 or 4 years. Since the Institute was founded in 2004, since then we have had around 15 PhD dissertations completed. Our MA started in 2008, and we have had around 20 students there. So, our MA is a very well-structured MA. We have 4 modules. One is theory and methods in cognition and culture. The other one is evolution and human behavior. The third one is social cognition, and the fourth one is cognitive science of religion. So, since cognitive science of religion is the topic of the conference, let me say a little bit more about the relationship between our institute and the cognitive science of religion. The cognitive science of religion has been one of the major components of our institute since its foundation. Harvey Whitehouse, Tom Lawson, who are leading figures in the area of cognitive science of religion, have played a major role in the formation and sustainability of the Institute of Cognition and Culture. And many of our students have developed their dissertation in this area. I think out of the 15 dissertations we have had so far, 8 are in the area of the cognitive science of religion. And it has been a major source of attraction for MA students as well. I've been collaborating with many different institutions. I have this relationship with Portugal, the University of Porto. They have a lab in this area which is called experimental philosophy. So I've been doing some research in this area as well. In fact, it's not, the experimental philosophy is more kind of a label for interdisciplinary research. What we are doing there at this point is we have a grant to develop research on moral judgments and its relation to emotions. So I'm collaborating with a philosopher and a neuroscientist to develop a framework to operationalize emotion in the context of moral judgments, because most of the moral literature, the literature on moral psychology, they make claims about the relationship between emotions and moral judgments, but the claims are a little bit speculative at this point. Most of the studies do not really have dependent measures that involve measuring emotions while people are making judgments. So this is a kind of a side project. I'm the director of the Institute of Cognition and Culture, but at the same time I have this collaboration with Porto. It's also a way of maintaining some connection with Portuguese, which is my native language, and I'm from Brazil, but Portugal at least is close in terms of familiarity of language and, in other respects.
Okay.
Currently, we have around 6 areas of research in the area, or in the field of the area of the cognitive science of religion. One of them is I'm collaborating with anthropologist Scott A. Tran on studying the relationship between sacred values, morality, violence, and religiosity. And sacred values are values that you hold very strongly, like if I ask you to, for example, would you sell your child? No one would accept that. So because people have a strong commitment to their children. And so these values are kind of values that are non-negotiable in most of the circumstances. And so we are interested in what leads people to have these kinds of commitments to protect certain things or to try to implement certain things that really drives them, influence their behavior, and even leads people to commit violent behavior to protect these values. This is mostly in the context of interethnic conflict. So we are studying this sacred values violence in the context of the Northern Ireland conflict, the conflict between Protestants and Catholics, and in South Africa, in the context of the conflict between blacks and whites. So the idea here is to see, to check what is the content of the sacred values that people hold in the context of the conflict, the extent to which they are susceptible to think about pursuing violent behavior to protect and to implement these values, and it's also its relationship to religiosity, and its relationship to religiosity in 3 different senses, because the notion of religion is a little bit ambiguous in the sense that you may think that the relationship between sacred values and religion is that sacred values are established by some commitment to religion as beliefs in supernatural beings, or more specifically as a result of participating in certain kinds of religious rituals, or more generally as a result of participating in some certain kinds of collective rituals that do not necessarily involve representations of supernatural beings, but nonetheless they can establish social cohesiveness. Let me give you an example. In Northern Ireland, we have what is called the Orange Parades, which are kind of types of rituals that they don't have a very strong connection with religion, but they seem to serve to establish some or to reinforce social identity and group identity in the context of the conflict. So this is one of the areas that we are doing research. This has strong implications in terms of how people should negotiate peace treatments in the context of conflicts, because you have to be very sensitive to the sacred values involved, because if sacred values are not negotiable, you have to really come up with strategic ways to really make people be more susceptible to agreement. There is another scholar from the Institute, John Lenneman. He's a new lecturer of the Institute. He's doing research in this area as well. So this is one of the main current research that we're pursuing at this point. Inter-ethnic conflict and the role of religiosity in establishing group cohesiveness and the sensation that violence may be obligatory to defend these sacred values. Another important area of research at the Institute that we are currently pursuing is the area of afterlife beliefs. Now, out of the 8 dissertations that the Institute has had so far, I think 4 of them were in the area of how people think about afterlife and whether people have dispositions to think about, to believe that, after biological death, we human beings survive. So I'm teaming with Claire White, who is a previous PhD student of the ICC and is now in California State University, Northridge, and also with a next PhD student of the ICC. His name is Mitch Hodge. So we are pursuing research on afterlife beliefs and also including reincarnation beliefs. And the main topic here is how do people conceptualize the afterlife? Do people conceptualize the afterlife as, people in the afterlife as disembodied souls, as, just minds without any relation to the body, or do they conceptualize people also as including some sort of body? And this is related to a current debate in the literature about whether we human beings are folk dualists. The idea of dualism would be that you have a strong, we make a strong distinction between mind and body, and then because we make this such a strong distinction, it's easy for us to think about the afterlife in terms of disembodied minds. Okay, so this is one of a second kind of line of research that we have there at the Institute. A third one that we are pursuing with some of the PhD students is related to phenomenology, folk psychiatry, and religion. And the main aim here is to see how religion can reinforce certain kinds of mental disorders. More specifically, we're dealing with 2 types of mental disorders. Thought insertion, which is a symptom of schizophrenia. It's the idea that some people think that other entities are putting ideas in their mind. Okay, and of course, in a religious context, supernatural entities are one of these entities that are susceptible to be interpreted as the entity responsible for putting things in your mind. The other context is of a thought disorder, is related to OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So many people have this experience that they are having some intrusive thoughts that they cannot control and that are recurrent. And normally these are bad thoughts, like a thought that you would hurt your child, you would, they are generally kind of sinful thoughts. And so we are interested in whether certain kinds of religious traditions, they reinforce this kind of moralization of thoughts. For example, in Christian tradition, there is a tendency to equate sinful thoughts with sinful deeds, as if to have a bad thought is almost the same thing as doing it. So, so this is another line of research that 2 of our PhD students are pursuing at this point. Lauren Sweeney, doing research on thought insertion, and Catherine O'Lone, doing research on OCD. There are 2 dimensions there. There's the more theoretical one is whether, the aim is to investigate the extent to which these variables are really a factor in in compromising the well-being of a person who is having this kind of disease or mental disorder. Well, it's very difficult to avoid this kind of vocabulary. So, you know, having kind of a clear idea about the extent to which these factors are indeed factors that influence moralization of thoughts, then we may come up with some kind of suggestions in terms of how people can improve their well-being in terms of not moralizing their own thoughts. Of course, it's a little bit difficult if the person is from a certain kind of religious tradition. Are you going to, you have to somewhat question the postulates of that religious tradition in order to make the people who are having the disorder not to be so compromised by the disorder, in the sense that, you know, moralizing your own thoughts makes you feel that you are a bad person, that you are to blame for having had that thought. In explicating this to, you know, to people who are having the disorder, it may at least alleviate them and say, oh, I'm not really that responsible for having had those thoughts, and you know, the fact of the idea of equating sinful thoughts with sinful deeds may be misleading as well. So now it's a little bit tricky to how you can come up with more practical consequences in this specific type of research. Of course, in contraposition to the one related to sacred values, then the practical consequences are more straightforward, in the sense that, you know, it may illuminate how you should pursue a process of negotiation between two groups that are in conflict. The other three are more related to John Lenman, who is the other staff member of the ICC, who has been just hired. So let me talk a little bit more about his research. Okay, so one of the lines of his research is really quite closely connected to the one related to sacred values and social cohesiveness and religion. So he's doing research in collaboration with Professor Harvey Whitehouse, and the topic is ritual, community, and conflict. And the topic is more or less the same, is to see the role of ritualization in establishing social cohesiveness, and also in inter-ethnic conflict, because the idea here is social cohesiveness is related to the conflict, because it's social cohesiveness between two groups that are in conflict. So this line is quite similar to my line about sacred values and violence and religion. The other line that John Lenman is pursuing is on secularism, atheism, and religiosity. And this is really a very exciting kind of type of research, because, look, to study religion, you have to have a glance on what is not to be religious. And to study atheism and secularism is a way of trying to see the extent to which people can be completely separated from religious beliefs. And this is very important theoretically as well, because there are many claims, many theoretical disputes in the cognitive science of religion related to the point whether whether we are innately predisposed to have religious beliefs, or whether religion is more a kind of byproduct of of our cognitive capacities. So it's now, atheists are really a kind of sample of people that can shed light on this dispute, because if you study atheists, and more importantly, atheists that have been raised in a kind of atheist context, you can see whether whether they still have some kind of religious intuitions or not. So the idea here is that if you are studying atheists who have been raised as atheists, for example, Sweden, in countries where atheism is quite widespread, and if you can show whether these persons, whether they still have religious intuitions, certain intuitions about thinking about phenomena in terms of teleological thinking, in terms of implicitly theism, thinking that certain events that have happened in your life are done for a certain purpose. If they have, even if they don't want, they still have some kinds of intuition. This would be a kind of strong evidence that we are innately predisposed to be religious. Now, on the other hand, if you find out that these atheists, and I'm talking about atheists who have been raised in an atheist context, they are completely, they don't really have any kind of religious intuitions. You have really a kind of strong evidence to claim that, in fact, religion, we're not really innately disposed. Even if religion is something that is very catchy, that you won't find most societies are religious, religious quite widespread, but you don't have to go there and say, look, this is really an innate disposition. You have to explain it by appealing to other psychological and ecological factors. When you're doing this kind of more theoretical kind of research, and of course theoretical involves empirical research at the same time, but the practical implications are not always immediately obvious. But my take is that although we do have to be concerned about what is the purpose in terms of practicality when you're doing science, you should always, it's a very legitimate concern. Many times it's very difficult to envisage in short term what are these kind of practical implications, but it does not mean that it does not have any practical implication. And the more what we could say is that more generally, the more you understand human behavior and the psychological dispositions that human beings have, the more you have kind of means to deal with psychological dispositions and human behavior in order to improve the quality of human life. Because we mentioned the point about inter-ethnic conflict, and this seems to be a recurrent feature of human history. And there may be two approaches to that. One is the kind of idealistic approach that just don't really take into account the limits of our psychology and the limits or the constraints of our behavior, and just try to implement policies that are completely uninformed by this kind of research about human beings, and that may lead to kind of things that are inefficacious in terms of implementation, because they are unrealistic. So knowing more the limits of the dispositions of human beings, and you may come up with much more efficacious kinds of policies to deal with conflict. This is a clear example, but I would say that this would be the same thing for any kind of dimension of human beings. The other point that we discussed about the kind of mental disorders, okay? You know, knowing the extent to which certain kind of religious traditions or mental dispositions are involved, you may come up with the best way of dealing with it. You know, it's not very easy to always to see exactly how you would implement certain kinds of practice that would improve the quality of human life, but the hope here is that in the long run, the more you know, the more you can come up with practical implications that can kind of improve human life.